Yeah, the end.
I wish that's how Bible actually looked on the inside.
Okay. After I graduated college, instead of landing a full-time job, as some of you know, that was my original plan. I chose to spend a year traveling with a youth encounter team, which meant that I did not get a paycheck. It meant that I would start deferring my student loans, which means I was not paying them back, and they would start accruing interest, which is really not a great thing to do. It meant that I would not be gaining experience for the type of work I thought that I was trying to pursue, and that was marketing. But I had been feeling called to ministry work in some different ways, and it wasn't a total surprise that I wanted to serve on a ministry team. The problem was it went against a lot of expectations, because I had just spent 4 years in college studying business and graphic design. I had been going into debt to earn this degree that I thought was sure to land me a great job that would help pay off that debt really quickly. And then that was the plan all along. But a really good friend of mine that worked for that youth encounter place kept suggesting that I do this. She thought that I'd be pretty good at it, but that wasn't my plan, and so I just kept saying no until I was getting ready to graduate. And I realized that I might feel more called to ministry than to marketing, and maybe this was a way to follow that call. So I did. I joined a youth encounter team, which meant that I was part of a music group that would lead worships and lock-ins and VBSs and all sorts of other things. And so really my team and I, we were a full band setup, and so our lead singer / guitar player was named Kyle, and he was from Texas, and he had a really good voice and a really big shaggy beard, and he played guitar. There we go. And then Ryan was quite a bit shorter, so that is to steal. Played electric guitar. He was very good. And he would sing. And then who else do we have? Oh, we had Justin back on the drums. Think about how to draw drums. And he was from Maryland. And he was very good. Alright, and then I was over here. I learned how to play bass because we needed a bass player, not another guitar player. So that was cool. Super cool bass, and I didn't so much sing, but yay. And then I had another teammate named Jessica who ran the sound, but somewhere else. So we'll ignore her for now.
Good.
That's me.
I love Jessica. Okay. So being on this team and on this musical group meant living out of a 15-passenger van and out of my suitcase for 12 whole months. It meant staying with people that we met along the way. And while it was oftentimes a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed a lot of the work that we did, it was also really very challenging. It's very emotionally draining to live with the same 4 people all of the time. It was really difficult not having any income. And I could go on about all the pros and cons of being on a youth encounter team. But there was a point during this year at which I really started to wonder why I was doing this. And I started to wonder what could have happened if I had just kept looking for a real job. And as I was looking back, part of me wanted to get out of this commitment. I wanted to go back and live with my parents so I could find a real job, or maybe I'd go back to school like half of my friends did. How quickly do we forget what we have seen and learned and look backwards? How easy is it to want whatever it was we had before just because it was easier, or because it made more sense, or because it was acceptable? A number of times in Exodus, the people have these moments where they forget. They seem to forget the promises that God has made to them. Or maybe they just start to think God's just not going to follow through. But he does. He always remembers and he always follows through. Just not always in a time frame that makes them happy or in ways that satisfy all their desires. First, we find God's people wandering out in the wilderness, which sounds like not the best situation. However, they're out there because they were just set free. They were released from their roles as slaves, and so they have to go forth to the promised land. But that's the thing, they have to go. And the deal was not that it was going to be within 24 or 48 hours. The deal was never that it would be easy, and it would be everything that you imagined it to be. And it was hard. And there wasn't a lot of food or water available, so they complained to the point that they would rather have gone back into slavery. So you've got people very sad and hungry and looking for water. And we had people that were hungry for food. People probably just sat down because they were tired and sat up.
Guys,
Yes?
Are we there yet? You had just tons and tons of people that were out there wandering around, and I don't know why, but I imagine this as a desert, so there you go. The sun is shining because it's the desert.
But it said wilderness.
They were so worried about meeting the needs that they had become accustomed to that they flat out stopped believing God would hold up his end of the bargain. Even though God provided water and God provided food when manna fell from the sky, and they did make it to the promised land eventually, just not the way or when they had planned. And then when they meet God in Mount Sinai, and they see God talking to Moses, they make a covenant with God. They will be God's priestly nation, and they will be representatives to the world for God. And then as soon as Moses goes up to talk to God and to get the commandments, they forget again. Right? So here's Mount Sinai, and here's God up top there, and Moses went up there, but you've got your people down here still. And there were more than 3 of them. So what do these people decide to do? They decide to make a golden calf statue, an idol to which they can pray and worship, and they thank the calf for saving them. And so we've got a cute little cow. Because cows are cute. Horns. There's a cow. They forget completely about God and the covenant because they think that they can just take control of the situation. If God isn't going to move the way that they want and when they want it, they'll just move on, and that's what they try to do. But God again interjects. He reminds them of his promise and that he definitely has not forgotten about them. How quickly do we forget? But fortunately, God does not. We have a God that remembers and a God that listens to us. Unlike other worldly leaders like that Pharaoh guy who don't listen to their people, our God listens and he hears us and he knows what it is his people are actually going through. It doesn't mean that God's going to swoop in and fix everything as soon as we want, just how we want. It doesn't mean that at all, which is where we tend to get frustrated and where the Israelites got frustrated. But God is faithful to God's people. And so what does our wilderness wandering look like? Where and when do we get so caught up trying to find what we think it is we need or what we think we want that we forget or that we forget why we're here? Or when do we just want to turn around and run just because things are not going how we think they should be going? Over and over again in Exodus, as in the whole story of God, God is faithful to his promises. We learned about Abraham in Genesis and how God followed through even when it seemed there was no hope. And so too in the book of Exodus, it ends with the building of a tabernacle. And the word tabernacle means to dwell. And so the tabernacle was where God's presence would dwell among the people, even as they traveled and were moving. And chapters upon chapters are spent giving Moses really specific instructions on how that tabernacle should be built. And then I won't go into the details, but there is the outer courts, there was the altar table for burnt offerings, there's the holiest of holies, and inside was the Ark of the Covenant. And this is the tabernacle, which means to dwell. But aside from the details and all the construction materials, God was providing his presence among the people in a very new kind of way, in a way that they hadn't really experienced before. It was God's presence as it had been originally in the Garden of Eden. And again, God's promises, God's covenants are fulfilled. God has promised, God does promise, and he continues to promise to take care of us. It won't always look or feel the way we want it to, or fit what the world tells us is best. But God has this way of knowing how things are going to go, and it's not always smooth or easy or painless. That was never part of the deal. But God is always there, and God always hears us, and God's always working for us. Even when we join a youth encounter team and put in paying our student loans and getting a paycheck, we don't always understand, but we can listen and trust that God is listening too. Amen.